Hi, I'm Missy Hughes. I'm Secretary and CEO of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Welcome to episode 2 of the Wisconsin Employer Vaccine Forum. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation is leveraging our wealth of partners and connections, as well as our platform, to offer employers insights into a vaccinated workforce. Today's conversation is the second in a series designed to share some of the key questions and concerns that face business owners and leaders as vaccinations become widely available. At WEDC, we know that the state's economic health is completely and inextricably connected to public health. And to help our business partners prepare for questions and concerns about how we move forward with the pandemic, today's guests represent two incredible resources in Wisconsin. I'd like them to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive into a conversation. Hannah, why don't you go first?
My name is Hannah Renfro. I am an employment law attorney at Lake Effect HR and Law. We have HR professionals and attorneys in our law firm, and we work collaboratively with our employer clients to provide services that cover the full spectrum of the employment relationship.
My name is Agatha Raynor, and I'm an attorney with Crivello Carlson. We are a full-service litigation firm, but I concentrate my practice on employment law. I do employment litigation defense, but I also work with employers to help ensure that they are in compliance with various laws that are applicable to them. And I also work with training supervisors and managers to help them understand the law and for them to comply with the laws as they're kind of the boots on the ground in the field, in the workforce.
So Hannah, I'm going to start with you. Can you help us understand, if you're an employee right now, what should you be thinking about? If you don't feel well or you've tested positive for COVID, do you tell your employer? What do you do about paid time off? All these kinds of questions on the employee side of things.
Employees should absolutely still be reporting to an employer if they test positive or if they have COVID symptoms, even if they've been vaccinated. But the critical piece there is really that employers need to have in place clear, consistent, and compassionate policies for their employees on health reporting. And they need to communicate those policies to their employees. Make sure that employees are receiving that information, that they know who to contact if they have questions about the reporting, if they have questions about their symptoms, and that somebody's promptly getting back to employees about that. And those policies, we need to make sure are complying with CDC guidelines and your local and public, any sort of local public health order. Employers should bear in mind that they may be eligible for federal tax credits to provide paid leave to employees who have COVID-related symptoms. So that is something that employers should be looking into.
And Aggie, what about the employer side of things? What should the employer be doing for the employee right now? Do you allow time off for vaccines? What if the employee calls and says, hey, I'm not feeling well? What would you say to an employer, just, in a big picture way?
As it relates to the vaccine, currently Wisconsin employers are not required to allow employees time off to get vaccinated. However, there is a strong push to give employers the tools that they need to give employees time off to get vaccinated. For example, the federal government is offering tax credits to employers that have less than 500 employees to provide their employees full pay to take time off to get the vaccine and to recover from the vaccine. This is through the American Rescue Plan, and it's meant to ensure that small businesses will not lose money by providing paid leave to workers who receive that COVID vaccination.
Aggie, you guys have both mentioned federal tax credits. So for our employers, what's the best way to know about those? Talk to their accountants, or what would you suggest? Okay, how do I get a federal tax credit?
I would suggest both. Talk to your HR professionals, your law, your employment lawyers, and your accountants. I think all three of those partners really need to be involved in that question, but a lot of it comes down to the tax issues, so your accountants should absolutely be a part of that conversation.
Hannah, as we move forward with vaccinations, what should employees know? For example, can their employer ask to see proof of vaccination? Does an employee have to share that?
So in general, employers can require proof of vaccinations. The vaccine itself is not a medical examination. The vaccine itself is not a disability-related inquiry. But employers want to make sure if they are requiring proof that they are only getting the vaccine information. What you don't want is an employee printing off something, for example, from their MyChart account that has their vaccine information and their blood pressure and their last doctor's visit. You just want that vaccine information. You also want to make sure that you've talked to your HR folks or an employment law attorney about where are you keeping that documentation, making sure it's kept confidential. And we strongly recommend that employers who have decided to mandate a vaccine and thus getting proof of the vaccination, that they are working with HR professionals and attorneys to set up a legally compliant infrastructure. And if you're taking that middle ground where you're encouraging but not mandating, then thinking about whether do you need to require proof? Maybe it would suffice for your organization to do a survey regularly with your employees and even anonymously ask them, if what you're looking for is a percentage, you can anonymously ask what your vaccination status is and if you intend to get a vaccination.
I feel compelled just to remind our employers who are tuning in that you are such a source of trusted information for your employees. Aggie, for those folks who have determined that they don't want to get the vaccine, all of this conversation can feel like a lot of pressure. It might even feel discriminatory. Tell us more about how employers can consider ADA policies and other guidance so that they can be sure they're being fair to all employees while they're encouraging vaccination.
Employers have to consider both issues related to disabilities, which may require reasonable accommodations, as well as employees who have a sincerely held religious belief that may be preventing the employee from getting that vaccination. So as it relates to disability-related concerns, for employees that have a disability under the federal or the state disability laws, employers may have to consider, or it should consider, whether reasonable accommodations have to be made for that employee. So that triggers what's known as an interactive process. The employer should talk to the employee about the underlying condition and what reasonable accommodations might there be to allow that employee to do his or her job. One of those reasonable accommodations may be continuing to work from home. But employers do have to consider potential accommodations under the ADA. And then as it relates to sincerely held religious beliefs, once an employer is on notice that an employee's sincerely held religious belief or practice is preventing the employee from receiving the vaccination, the employer also must provide a reasonable accommodation for that belief. So there is interactive dialogue that has to take place between the employer and the employee to see if there is an accommodation that has to be made and that can be made.
So as you get back into the workplace and you have employees who have not been vaccinated and employees who have been vaccinated, and you might not know who's who, Hannah, can you tell us a little bit about what you should be thinking about as far as safety practices go in the workplace?
Overarching rule there is that employers are required to maintain a safe work environment. For right now, employers should be maintaining masking, distancing, and cleaning practices. One, because some employers are going to be in communities where there are local public health orders that require that. But the other is just from a practical standpoint is that you as you mentioned, you are going to have a mix of vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and unvaccinated employees, clients, customers, vendors that come on site, other individuals that might come onto your work site. So now is not the time to let that guard down. One of the things that has come up is what if you're having a meeting with 5 people and everybody wants to be maskless and distanceless because everybody's fully vaccinated. And employers can start thinking about that, and they should start thinking about that, but they need to have in advance policy, procedure, and practice in place for that if they're going to do that. What you don't want is a situation where an employee decides in a meeting on an ad hoc basis, I think we're all fully vaccinated here. Let's take our masks off. This is fine. You might have somebody in the room that has, as Aggie was mentioning, has a disability that precludes them from getting a vaccination. And suddenly they are feeling pressure to justify not being vaccinated, or they don't feel safe. So those are things that need to be addressed in advance. We need to make sure that managers understand this is when it will be allowed, this is when it won't be allowed, this is who's collecting that information, this is how we're doing it. You don't want decisions like that being made on the fly.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated.
Yes.
Aggie, so much of this is workplace laws, and Wisconsin is an Atwill work state, which means you can ask someone to leave the workplace. You can terminate somebody at will for no reason at all. What would you advise an owner in that situation?
At will generally means, just like you said, that absent a contract, a collective bargaining agreement, or some other type of an agreement, generally either the employer or the employee can end an employment relationship at any time for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all. But, and here is the big but, employers cannot make decisions that violate any of the applicable laws. We've talked about several of them today, right? We've talked about the ADA. We've talked about laws related to religious discrimination. Hannah has mentioned local orders and government orders. There's OSHA. So even under the umbrella of at-will employment, employers are still subject to many laws as it relates to safety, anti-discrimination, and otherwise. So even in the at-will context, employers have to be sure that they are not violating all of those laws. In the state of Wisconsin, all employers are subject to the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act. Depending on size, some Wisconsin employers may also be subject to federal laws, but in general, there are protected classes that protect employees based on being a member of a protected class, their sex, their religion. Employers can't discriminate based on disability, sexual orientation, and many others. So employers have to be mindful of the laws that they are subject to and make sure that the decisions that they are making don't violate those laws.
Aggie, what are the 3 key things a business owner should be thinking about right now as employees get vaccinated and businesses return to capacity?
First and foremost, employers have to be aware of the laws that are applicable to them. What does the law say I have to do? What does the law say I cannot do? And then in the context of those legal considerations, what are the operational needs? Employers have to look at really what is best for my business. Is it best for my business to bring employees back now? Or is it best for my business to wait to bring back employees? And then at the end of that, I think there are the cultural considerations that employers have to consider. What is the effect on the culture of my business here? Just because I can bring employees back, does that mean that I should right now? Employers should be asking questions. Does a lot of my workforce have young children that are still at home? And, would it make more cultural sense for my business to just wait a few more weeks and bring employees back then? And just make sure that the decisions that you're making, even if they were well-intentioned, look to make sure that it doesn't have an unintentional discriminatory effect on your workforce.
Hannah, what about the employees? As they return to work, what should they be expecting? What should they be asking for with regard to safety and vaccines and all of this?
I think as we've touched on, it's those safety practices need to still be in place. Those are not going to change anytime soon. But right now, we're seeing more harassment and discrimination claims coming out. And some of that is the result of people returning to work, and maybe there was a more casual environment while people were remote. But it's also from anxiety and discomfort and conflicts that are arising from not being around people except for your household or a very tiny bubble for 13 months. Stress, maybe your partner lost a job. Maybe your kid has not been in school for the past year. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do for childcare. Maybe you've lost someone during the pandemic. All of these things that are in disagreements about vaccinations and whether you're vaccinated or how people feel about vaccinations. All of those things are kind of bubbling to the surface. And now is just a really great time to reinforce, to have your training, respectful workplace training, reinforcing your DEI work, and just that genuine sense of belonging for your employees.
Aggie, are you seeing any, big trends that you're thinking about, when it comes to employment law? I mean, the whole thing has been upended, but what do you see coming forward?
Obviously, a big trend in workplaces is going to be work from home issues and flexibility issues. A lot of employers have found that work from home works for either their whole workforce or segments of their workforce. Employers may have found that, the flexibility that they have almost been required to provide over the last year has actually resulted in more productivity for their employees. So I think that work from home and flexibility are going to be two big trends we see in the workplace. And then it's a wonderful opportunity for training employers, supervisors, managers. You might have a part of your workforce at home, a part in person. You may now have, you may know about employees with disabilities, and it's a great training opportunity for employers to remind their supervisors and managers about what they can, should, and should not be doing to manage their workforces.
All right. Wow. That is a lot to take in. And it's fantastic that there are professionals like Hannah and Aggie who are able to help our business owners all around Wisconsin navigate these complex issues. So thank you again for joining WEDC as we continue to share and connect you to the resources that support businesses across Wisconsin. In our next forum, Return to Work Guidance, we will share expertise from the Department of Workforce Development and more about these complex issues. Hannah and Aggie, thank you again so much for joining us.